Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you and welcome to the first session of the day. Interestingly enough, when I talk about engaging voices from within the educational ecosystem, first and foremost, when I started, that meant teacher voices because I thought they were quite underrepresented. But it very quickly became obvious to us at ResearchEd that a conversation simply within ourselves wouldn't be as powerful as if we looked out beyond ourselves, which is why it's vitally important that at ResearchEd we try and have conversations between and with other participants of the education ecosystem, so researchers, academics, universities, think tanks and policymakers. And the odd thing I find is that some people criticise the idea of asking somebody involved in policy to speak. I mean, whenever we've done ResearchEds around the world, we also get a little bit of pushback on this. But I think it's absolutely madness not to want to listen and speak to people who are involved in crucial policy decisions when it comes to the use of evidence in policy making. And I welcome the fact that any policymaker would want to be involved in that. And one of the people that's been a massive supporter of what we've been doing for the past few years, not in a formal or an economic way, but simply in a kind of in a practical and ethical way, has been the man you're about to listen to. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Minister Nick Gibb. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. Summarising the aims of ResearchEd, Tom, you recently wrote that ResearchEd is determined to break things, not for the sake of destruction, but to break the shibboleths that have for too long dominated education policy and stifled the spread of evidence-led teaching. As the West Wing's President Bartlett said to Will Bailey, if you remember that episode, borrowing from a quote from the anthropologist Margaret Mead, he quoted, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever does." And ResearchEd is a grassroots, teacher-led revolt against the old order in education, a challenge to received wisdom, and it's a rejection of the status quo. And you are the small group of thoughtful, committed teachers who are changing the world of education. These conferences are changing the relationship between teachers and education research. As many teachers have told me, and as many teachers in this room will no doubt recognise, the research historically presented to teachers was monotone in content and it was seldom used. ResearchEd is different. By granting a platform to a wide range of views, the currency of speakers is the quality of the evidence they are presenting. And teachers can vote with their feet, as Tom Bennett put it in a recent blog, and people do read your blogs, Tom. In one room, you might have a government minister taking questions of the evidence base of the latest policy, and next door, there might be a teaching assistant discussing how she launched journal clubs at her school. I love that sense of levelling, of democratic representation that it embodies. And I think, Tom, that this perfectly sums up ResearchEd, although I'm now wondering who is speaking next door at this moment. And not only is this conference the embodiment of teacher empowerment, it is a triumph of science over assumed authority. Irreverence for authority is arguably the most liberating consequence of the scientific method. And whilst there is still cause to listen and learn from learned men and women, no opinion, however authoritative, can be cause to dismiss evidence out of hand. Science, facts and objectivity don't care about your reputation. Science cares about your evidence, your data and your hypothesis. In science, p-values trump PhDs. So today I hope that all participants at this conference will take advantage of the cast list of speakers that Tom has assembled and seize the opportunity to challenge Dr. Becky Allen on her analysis of this year's GCSE data, probe the validity of comparative judgment with Daisy Christodoulou, debate direct instruction with Chris Bolton, explore the effectiveness of academies with Karen Weisbeiser, or quiz Amanda Spielman on the reliability of Ofsted inspections. There are many examples from history of history of science to show reputation need be no barrier to making meaningful contributions to human knowledge and understanding. And few are more inspiring than the story of Srinivasa Ramanujan, portrayed in the film, which I hope many of you have seen, The Man Who Knew Infinity. Having had almost no mathematical training, he began a postal relationship with English mathematician G.H. Hardy in 2013. And from the quality of the maths in the letters, Ramanujan's genius was immediately apparent. By 1914, he was working in Cambridge, following a month-long voyage across the globe, and in the next 6 years, before his untimely death at the age of 32, this previously unknown son of a sari shop clerk made important contributions to mathematical fields such as analysis and number theory, becoming one of the youngest fellows of the Royal Society. And the romance of this story shows the emancipatory power of scientific thought, but it goes to demonstrate that any source of evidence and new ideas can cast doubt on received wisdom and generate better understanding. And it is by permitting and embracing doubt that humanity has made some of its greatest strides. Doubt is to be embraced, not eschewed. Consider the debates, the early debates on quantum mechanics, as I do often, between two of the great physicists who have ever lived, Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein. Famously, Einstein was reticent to accept the full consequences of the uncertainty principle, and he famously declared, "I, at any rate, am convinced that God does not throw dice." And through debate, through experiments, data and evidence, Niels Bohr's interpretation triumphed over that of Einstein, arguably the greatest scientific authority since Newton. Real science and proper research is open to doubt. It doesn't balk at challenge, but it embraces it and evolves to improve knowledge and understanding. Research Ed is now established around the world, with teachers in 3 continents coming together to share and debate the research that has inspired their teaching. It's a forum that allows teachers to debate what the evidence says about best practice in schools. And this movement, as I said last year, will improve the education and life chances of millions of children. Year on year, the speakers at the conference become more diverse. Importantly, this diversity includes hosting speakers with contrasting political, philosophical, and educational viewpoints. And yet, there are still some education academics who question the motives of Tom Bennett, Research Ed, and all the volunteers who helped to make these conferences a success. And to my mind, this is an indictment of those researchers who choose to disparage this movement rather than engage and contribute. Refusal to debate one's research and share it with teachers begs a number of questions. Notably, what is education evidence for if it isn't to be shared with teachers? And what is there to fear from presenting and discussing your research at a politically, philosophically, and educationally diverse conference? But presenting one's research to classroom teachers shouldn't be countenanced as a fear, but as an opportunity, as should the chance to present and debate and discuss in a vibrant marketplace of ideas such as Research Ed. The Heterodox Academy is a politically pluralistic group of professors working in various academic fields, drawn together to improve academia by enhancing viewpoint diversity and the conditions that encourage free inquiry. And this group, which includes the likes of Philip Tetlock and Jonathan Haidt, has highlighted the cost of a lack of viewpoint diversity in social science and humanity departments. Thankfully, there are many respected academics who are seizing the opportunity to present today. Teachers attending this conference will have the opportunity to listen to Dr. Pedro Broca and dispel myths and point to promising avenues for the role of technology in education. Dr. Christian Bockhoff of Southampton University will be arguing that some myth-busting in education is oversimplistic and creates new myths. And Professor Ayako Kawaji is running a session on what we can learn from expressive writing in Japan. But it's a shame that some would rather stay in their ivory towers than participate today. The intellectual timidity of those who choose to smear Research Ed whilst refusing to debate their evidence, stands in stark contrast to the efforts that Research Ed makes to be inclusive for all. On a very limited budget, armed with little more than the goodwill of speakers and volunteers, Research Ed will run conferences in New York, in Toronto and Amsterdam in the coming months. Included in the meagre entrance fee is lunch, if you have a ticket, snacks and a creche for parents of young children, all for a fraction of the price of some education conferences. Here endeth the advertisement. So, responding to some criticism, Tom decided to restate the objectives of Research Ed, arguing that it is important to continually define ourselves in order not to be misrepresented or misunderstood. And he eloquently explained his mission to disrupt shibboleths and tip sacred cows. Research Ed delights, he said, in debate, changing paradigms and helping to generate a polite revolution in the classroom. I started it because I believed passionately, and still do, that education needs a revival, if not a reboot. It labours under so many false dogma and uninformed suppositions that in many ways it resembles medicine in the 18th century, when the doctor's authority was privileged and his hunch was the final word. Just as medicine finally succumbed to empirical science, so too should education, as an aid to our decisions, not as an authoritarian mosaic tablet. It should intersect with our very action, with our every action, so that when evidence is available, we use it to inform our pedagogy and policy rather than stifle it. Bogus fads like learning styles and brain gym are the least of it. Wild, unchecked pseudoscience abounds, untested, unrestrained. It is still possible for a teacher, he said, to be told that group work is the best way for children to learn without any consideration of when and where and how it might be applicable. Teacher talk is reviled, despite the enormous amount of research that suggests that careful, dialogic teacher talk is one of the most effective ways to convey information that is then retained. There are many more examples of such things, he said. None of these matters are settled, but every educator should be entitled to hear the evidence on both sides and make up their minds on the matter. And this contrasts, Tom, with those who eschew the international Research Ed conferences could hardly be greater. And Tom is right that it is important to restate one's beliefs. Not only can we be misrepresented and misunderstood, but we can lose arguments that we thought we had already won. In this country, we are winning the argument in favour of a knowledge-rich curriculum. We are winning the reading wars, and parents are voting with their feet on the question of free schools. We must continue to expound the evidence in favour of how a knowledge-rich curriculum benefits all pupils, particularly the most disadvantaged. In the same breath, we must continue to make the argument for the EBAC. This policy is crucial to ensuring that all pupils benefit from a broad and balanced core academic curriculum at GCSE. And research suggests that lower participation from disadvantaged pupils in these core academic subjects can negatively affect social mobility. Yet overall, disadvantaged pupils remain half as likely to be entered for the EBAC subjects as their non-disadvantaged peers, and the gap in EBAC subject entry persists even amongst the most academically able disadvantaged pupils. Evidence from the Sutton Trust found pupils in a set of 300 schools that increased their EBAC entry from 8% to 48% were more likely to achieve good English and Maths GCSE, more likely to take an A-level or an equivalent level 3 qualification, and more likely to stay in post-16 education. And the authors of that study noted, and I quote, that pupil premium students benefited most from the changes at these schools. And that's why this policy is so important and why we must continue to make the case. But there are some who argue that the EBAC is not right for some pupils, and too often these pupils are from disadvantaged backgrounds. I firmly disagree with this view. A recent publication from the Institute of Education examining the effect that GCSE choice has on post-16 added yet further weight to the evidence demonstrating that the EBAC is crucial to driving social mobility. And this paper found the following, and I quote, students pursuing an EBAC-eligible curriculum at 14 to 16 had a greater probability of progression to all post-16 educational outcomes, while taking an applied GCSE subject had the opposite effect. There were no social class differences in the advantages of pursuing an EBAC eligible curriculum, which suggests that an academically demanding curriculum is equally advantageous for working class as for middle class pupils. And on launching the report, one of the authors, Professor Alice Sullivan, said, the results show that controlling for both prior attainment and a range of socioeconomic and other factors, pupils who had taken EBAC subjects at GCSE were 7 percentage points more likely to stay on at school. So the EBAC is a benefit to all pupils, irrespective of their prior attainment, irrespective of their background or sex. Indeed, the report found that, and I quote again, pursuing an EBAC eligible curriculum increased the chances of educational progression, particularly strongly for girls and white young people, and studying an applied subject decreased the chances of girls staying on. In particular, studying an EBAC eligible curriculum at age 14 to 16 increased the chances of studying subjects favoured by selective universities at A-level. So given the importance of raising attainment for white working class boys and increasing the proportion of girls taking STEM subjects, particularly post-16, these results are very encouraging. So the government will continue to make the case for more pupils studying the EBAC. We believe that a core academic curriculum comprising the EBAC subjects alongside other high-quality, knowledge-rich subjects, including the arts, should be available to the vast majority of pupils, because that is what the evidence shows. As Tom Bennett said, you know who benefits most from working with evidence? Children. And of them, who benefits most? The least advantaged. Those with no second chances, no tutors, no jobs waiting for them in publishing, no matter how they do. The children who are poor, marginalised, miles away from the opportunities of and privileges of the elite, they are the ones who need this most. It is our duty to overturn every dogma we have, obtain the best evidence we can, and turn that into rocket fuel for the ones that need it most. So many schools, including those making the most progress in the country, are providing their pupils with opportunity to study the EBAC suite of qualifications. And the government is determined that schools around the country follow the evidence and grow the number of pupils given access to these core academic subjects. With every new piece of research that confirms the importance of a core academic curriculum to social mobility and improved attainment, we must push back the voices of opposition. We must make the moral and evidence-based case for an academic curriculum for all pupils, regardless of their background. Making the case at conferences such as this, at teach meets or in the school staff room, is vital. Consider another evidence-based argument, which is now close to being won, thanks to tireless work by teachers and academics pursuing the evidence. For over a century, war has waged in education over the most effective means of teaching children to read. And finally, this fight is coming to an end thanks to the strong evidence in favour of systematic synthetic phonics. And one of the most important interventions in this war came from America's Rudolf Flesch in 1955. And in his book entitled Why Johnny Can't Read and What You Can Do About It, Flesch concluded that Johnny was being held back at the age of 12 for his poor reading ability because he had not been properly taught how to read. And Johnny had been taught to read using a method known as look and say, in which children repeat written words they see on the page until they recognise the whole word on sight. And as they begin to recognise more and more words, so the theory goes, they pick up the ability to read. And this was regarded as easier than the time-honoured method of teaching the sounds of the alphabet and how to blend these sounds into words, the method known as phonics. And Flesch was deeply critical of the existing orthodoxy in the States about how best to teach reading. For decades, educationists had formed two camps. A small group in favour of using phonics was opposed by a larger body that promoted this so-called look and say, or whole word method. And according to this now discredited theory, children would learn to recognise whole words or use context or other stimuli to guess what the word might be. And thankfully, due to the overwhelming evidence in favour of phonics, there are now few educationalists prepared to deny that phonics should play a role in early reading instruction. Sadly, though, as so often when a losing argument is in its death throes, many decry the false dichotomy between teaching using phonics and using these now discredited approaches to reading. Instead, many educationists advocate using a mix of methods, combining guessing at words using context with some phonics training thrown in. Again, the evidence clearly shows that this is not an effective means of teaching children to read. And these fallacious and unevidenced beliefs about reading instruction have blighted the early education of generations of children around the world. I vividly recall meeting a 9-year-old girl in a school I visited shortly before the 2010 general election. This girl had never been taught to decode. Instead, she had been given books accompanied by descriptive pictures. And rather than using her knowledge of the phonetic code, she was encouraged to guess words using pictures and the context of the story. The tragedy was that at the age of 9, she simply couldn't read, a situation that should not and need not have been allowed to happen. But alas, she was not unique. But in recent years, there has been a reading revolution in England's schools. Last year, thanks to the hard work of teachers and the emphasis the government has placed on teaching phonics, there are 147,000 more 6-year-olds on track to become fluent readers than in 2012. The achievement is the culmination of evidence-based policy and teaching. In 2016, 81% of pupils reached the expected standard in a phonics screening check, up from just 58% in 2012, and with 91% of pupils reaching this standard by age 7. So based on that 91%, it's clear there's even more room for greater achievement at the end of year 1. There are few, if any, more important policies for improving social mobility than ensuring all pupils are taught to read effectively. Literacy is the foundation of a high-quality, knowledge-rich education, and those opposed to the use of systematic phonics instruction are, in my view, standing between pupils and the education they deserve. Unfortunately, the pernicious arguments that ignore the evidence in favour of phonics still abound and are having a detrimental effect on the take-up of phonics in some parts of the country. By 2014, about 2/3 of primary teachers surveyed by the government agreed that the teaching of systematic synthetic phonics has value in the primary classroom. But 90% also agreed, or somewhat agreed, that a variety of different methods should be used to teach children to decode words. The evidence in favour of using phonics during early reading instruction is overwhelming. Now the battle is to spread this message to all classrooms, and events such as this one provide an excellent platform for disseminating evidence-based practice. It is important to make and remake the arguments so that all pupils benefit from the very best teaching methods in primary school. And just as it's important to expound the evidence in favour of effective teaching practice, it's vital to reflect on and celebrate the structural reforms that are driving improvements in England's education system. The expansion of academy freedoms to nearly 7 in 10 secondary schools and 1 in 5 primary schools has improved parental choice and increased diversity of provision in schooling, injecting challenge and spreading innovation throughout the school system. And whilst there's plenty of data to demonstrate this success, the most compelling evidence for providing teachers and schools with greater freedoms comes from visiting some of the highest performing academies and free schools in England. And this year, yet another group of free schools saw their first cohort of pupils receive their GCSE results. And while we don't have confirmed pupil level or school level data, there are a number of schools who appear to have done extremely well. Schools such as Ict Academy in Feltham, where Toby Young has reported for New Schools Network that 96% at that school are getting a grade 4 or more in English and Maths. Dixon's Trinity Academy, where New Schools Network report that 81% are achieving grades 4+ in English and Maths. And both of these serve disadvantaged communities, and so their results really are compelling. And if you go to Tawhidul Islam Boys School, 93% of pupils at that school are achieving a grade 4 or higher in English and Maths at GCSE. And as with other leading academies and free schools, these innovative free schools pride themselves on having a strong approach to behaviour management and teaching all pupils a stretching and knowledge-rich curriculum. And as more and more of the country's leading academies and free schools, such as Harris Academy in Battersea, King Solomon Academy, register country-leading academic results for their pupils, we will see a change in expectations and approach in schools right around the country. These high-performing academies and free schools serve as evidence of what it is possible to achieve. They demonstrate the power of having the very highest expectations of all pupils, and they've raised what we now conceive of as high expectations. Importantly, they show that a core academic curriculum serves the interests of all children. They also dispel the myth that teacher-led instruction and the highest behavioural expectations are only right for certain children in specific regions of the country. No longer is it tenable to argue that the success of the trailblazing King Solomon Academy can only be achieved in London. One only needs to visit Towheedle schools in Blackburn or Dixon's Trinity in Bradford to dispel that myth. These arguments are not theoretical anymore, they are empirical. As well as providing a high-quality education to their pupils, free schools have served as petri dishes. They have shined a light on what works in schools, what whole school policies, which curricula and which pedagogies work best. And teachers can visit these schools, taking inspiration and ideas from what they see, and take those back to their own schools. And through their excellence, by sharing their stories, these free schools are providing and disseminating evidence. And by pursuing the evidence, fostering innovation and sharing findings with others, free schools have started an education revolution that simply cannot be ignored. And in this way, they mirror what is happening in research ed. So through innovation and a desire to challenge and create new solutions, teacher-led organisations are changing the education landscape. Evidence and empiricism now trumps dogma and received wisdom. And teachers, academics, and most of all, pupils stand to gain. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. We've got a few minutes left. If anybody wanted to ask a question? No, that's great. Okay, let's go. Anyone, hand up, please. If you shout it, and then I'll perhaps repeat it for the microphone, okay? Oh, you've got a mic. The lovely Alex will now bring it to you. Alex made the programme, incidentally, so thank you, sir.
Hello. Oh, no. I was just wondering, you said the word core subject over 15 times, and you said arts once. I was just wondering if you could perhaps put where you think the emphasis needs to go and how you sort of weigh that balance up, please.
The arts are hugely important, and the evidence is that those schools that take the arts seriously in their curriculum choice and expectations for pupils, they are the schools that improve their EBAC performance and perform better at EBAC than other schools. So I very firmly believe that for a rounded, broad education, pupils should be taking seriously the arts, including music. Now, it's not included in the EBAC because we wanted to keep the EBAC sufficiently small to enable pupils to specialise in different things. But if you think about the EBAC generally, nobody disagrees that science shouldn't be compulsory to 16. No one disagrees that English and maths shouldn't be compulsory to 16. Until the year 2004, foreign languages were compulsory to 16, and all these subjects, including history and geography, are compulsory to the end of Key Stage 3. So what we're talking about in this debate about the EBAC is history, geography, and a foreign language for the last 2 years of compulsory education. That's what the debate is about. And the view of the government, the view of some of the best performing schools in the country, and if you look around the world and see the curriculum that is compulsory in other countries around the world, it is compulsory to take a language to 16. It's compulsory to take a humanities subject to 16. But if you keep the EBAC small enough, as we have, and don't give in to the temptation to add more and more subjects to that core, you do enable pupils to also take a vocational subject, to take a third language, to take art subjects to GCSE. And that's really what lies behind the whole EBAC policy, which I believe is proving very successful.
Thank you very much. We've been hearing for some time now about systematic synthetic phonics. I wonder, in your view, what is the next aspect of the curriculum or teacher practice due for the systematic synthetic phonics treatment?
Well, it has been very successful, you are right, and it is the foundation of education. And I'm very proud of the fact that schools have raised the expected pass rate now from 58% to 81%. It is phenomenal, and I anticipate and hope it will continue to rise further still. We have been doing a lot of work in terms of how maths is taught in primary schools. We have the Maths Hub, we have Maths Mastery. We've had these exchanges of teachers going out to Shanghai and some Shanghai teachers coming back to England over the last 2 or 3 years that has proven very successful and very popular with those schools that have participated. We've had a trial of textbooks. The Singapore textbooks have been trialled in schools and again have proven very popular and effective because they are systematic in their approach to teaching primary mathematics. So I'm hoping that we can do more work in terms of the maths hubs, again, which again are raising the quality of the pedagogy, the quality of the curriculum in terms of how we teach maths to young children.
It's always a delight to hear the interest that you have in early reading instruction. The concern that I have is we have 20% of children who are arriving at secondary school unable to read, and I'm wondering if the government has got any plans to actually put something in place to ensure that those children don't continue to fall through the gap.
Yes, I mean, we have to do everything we can to incentivise and encourage secondary schools to help those children starting secondary school who are still behind the reading to catch up, and there has been a catch-up premium for secondary schools to help those schools to address those concerns. We had a proposition in the 2015 manifesto for a resit of these tests. What we're going to do is to have papers available for Year 7 pupils to enable schools to ensure they have caught up, because it is very important. But I'm hoping that in the years ahead, we won't have those kind of statistics. If we get the systematic synthetic phonics, the decoding skill sorted in those first years of primary school, it's then a matter of encouraging children to read for pleasure, to read more and more books, to increase their speed of reading, their fluency in reading. So by the time they then start secondary school, they'll not only be able to read mechanically, they'll also have quite a sophisticated standard of reading, ready to take on the more challenging secondary curriculum.
You talked about the EBAC. I think it's been delayed by about 7 years. I just wondered why and what we can do to speed it up.
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand. Delay for 7 years?
I've heard that EBAC's been delayed by 7 years to hit the targets, if you look at the 2 manifestos.
No, what we're saying is that by 2022 we expect 75% of pupils to reach the expected, to be studying the EBAC, and by 2025, 90% to be studying the EBAC. Now, I think those are very demanding strategies, targets, if you like. They require schools to have the right teaching staff, and we are living in a world with a strong economy. Every year we work phenomenally hard to ensure that we recruit enough graduates, high quality graduates, into teaching. When you're competing against industry, and it's not just exclusive to this country, other countries in the world are facing the same challenges in recruiting graduates into teaching. We want to make sure that these targets are deliverable and realistic for schools, and that's why we have this stepping stone of 75% and then 90%. But the truth is that we want all pupils to be taking the core academic subjects to EBAC. Now, there are some pupils, and that's what we consulted on over a very long period of time in the consultation. We consulted on asking the sector, who are those pupils who you feel are not able to take the EBAC subject. That's what we consulted on, and that's what led us to respond by 2022 75% and 2025 90%. And that is a realistic target, taking into account the fact that schools need to recruit the right number of teachers to teach that core suite of subjects.
Thank you. Hello, as the head of computer science department in a state school, I was hoping you were going to talk about your vision for computer science. ICT and computer science are two very different subjects, as you know. Are you going to address the lack of ICT choice at Key Stage 4?
Well, there are a range of non-GCSE subjects that are in the Section 96 list that do count in performance tables that are available for schools to teach. But what we wanted to do, and it had a lot of support from not just the school sector, but from those who specialise in the area that you are in, there was criticism of the ICT curriculum, and that's why we disapplied the ICT national curriculum, and why we had an increased emphasis on computer science in both the national curriculum and the choice of GCSE. And I think in the long run that is the right answer to our education system, but there are still ICT qualifications available at Key Stage 4 and beyond for those pupils that want to take that particular route.
30 seconds then. Very, very quick one. 30 second response.
You touched upon the performance of working class kids. The pupil premium is now reaching maturity. Do you think the research suggests it's working?
Well, I think it's very important. All the evidence is that it does. It's more costly to educate children from more challenging backgrounds, and that's why deprivation is such an important factor within the national funding formula. And it's also why we are retaining the pupil premium, so that schools can use that extra funding. We're talking about £2.5 billion a year in order to provide specialist teaching and extra facilities for those pupils from more challenging backgrounds. I think both these policies are absolutely right. And we have seen over the last few years the gap between disadvantaged and their more advantaged peers closing. And it's closing that, well, it's going in the right direction, and that is the direction we want it to continue to go in. And that's why we're continuing with the pupil premium, and it's why deprivation counts as such an important factor in the national funding formula.
I'm just super conscious of the time, and people get 9 minutes to get to the next session. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much to... Thank you very much.